Thanks all for being here. As always, we appreciate your commitment and your interest into our joint seminar series. Let me hand over to Ariel, who is going to introduce the speaker. Over to you, Ariel.
Okay, thank you very much, GB. Today we are honored to have a very important person in the field of water economics and probably in other fields, but this is something that I am not sure about because I don't know. So we have Professor Frank Ward from the New Mexico State University talking to us, or talking with us more appropriately to say, on new developments in hydroeconomic models. And he decided to title his talk with Climate Change and Water Resource Management, which probably captures best the powerful ability of the framework that he is considered to be one of the developers and users and demonstrators. So Frank is a distinguished achievement professor at New Mexico State, as I mentioned earlier. And he is very well known around the world with his work on management of water, introducing new ideas and new methodologies that make difference in the way that we deal with water. For me, for example, I mean, I know Frank for many years, but for me, one of the most favorite publications of his is the one that he published in 2008 that changed the way that I was looking about water conservation. And this is the water conservation in irrigation can increase water use. And everyone who reads that title says, what? So this is a very interesting and probably a must-reading paper that is one of my favorites. But we invited Frank today not because of that paper, but because of his expertise on hydroeconomic modeling. And I don't want to take too much time because he has 31 slides and I don't want to put him under pressure. So I will let Professor Ward start his presentation. Please go ahead, Frank.
Thank you very much, Professor Dinar. Can you folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Very well. I can hear you very well.
Okay. Yeah, these hydroeconomic models are very interesting, and I've been working on them for, gosh, several years, probably 20, if not more. And I didn't even know those things were called hydroeconomic models until someone asked me, how do I like building these models and running them to support policy debates? And so then I realized what they were called. But yet it wasn't until a little over a year ago when Dr. Dinar asked me to write a review article on these hydroeconomic models for the journal Water Economics and Policy that he's an editor of, that I thought, gee, maybe I should try to write an article, a review article. And I think your organizers have posted that article. It's about 80 pages. And I'm going to give a kind of a shortened version of that paper today. But I think a very good place to start is right here, this little picture of what I call a typical river basin. And this basin really shows, can you guys see my cursor here moving around? Can you see the cursor? Oh, no. Okay, why don't I try this thing here? Can you see it now better? Can you see the little red dot moving around?
I can see it, but I don't know about the others.
Okay, so I'll assume the red dot's visible. Thank you, Ariel. So the typical river basin situation is where you have water coming in off mountains, it's captured in a reservoir. And one or two of our audience members say they're not seeing our slideshow. I don't quite know what to do about that. So GB, maybe you can help us out, make the slideshow visible to everybody. And Ash also said, I cannot see the slideshow. Gosh, GB, what do you think we should do?
No, that's fine. I can see them. I don't know why can't they see them.
Okay, so you've got a reservoir here, you've got a dam, and then you've got a river coming out of the releases from the dam, and you've got all these competing uses. You've got water being taken out of the river for cropping, and of course they also pump groundwater for their crops. Then you've got return flows going back into the river. You've got more water coming out for urban use through treatment plants. That gets returned to the river. And then you have downstream riparian habitat, and then you might have treaty obligations to a downstream country. So if you're Turkey, you might have delivery obligations to Iraq or Syria, and all the great river basins of the world have these upstream, downstream competitions. We here in New Mexico have to make treaty deliveries to Mexico of a certain amount every year. So you have these competing uses of the river, and the question is, what is the best way to use that water, and how might today's uses be changed so benefits could be, economic benefits could be improved. So this picture sort of sets the tone for the whole talk. Another example of the, let's see if I can get this thing to work here. There we go. This is a, let's see if I can get that to pop up. For some reason, that's not popping up. Okay, so there we go. So this would be one typical river basin, the Rio Grande, where we live, where you have a reservoir upstream, and then you have releases, and some of those go into agriculture. Agriculture also pumps water. Some of them go into cities. Cities also pump water. Actually, Las Cruces has only pumped water. And then you got New Mexico-Texas border, and then down there, the city of El Paso pumps water. They also have surface water. They also got return flows. They take water out of two basins, the Mesilla and the Hueco Basin. The city of Juarez, Mexico, I don't believe they take surface water, but they pump lots of water out of both those basins. And then you have a Mexican irrigation district. You have the El Paso irrigation district. So you have all these users taking water out of rivers, and you have return flows, you have pumping. So it's a fairly complicated system, and so you got to do something about that, figure out what is happening or what could be happening, the factual or the counterfactual. So I'll give you some examples of some typical science questions. Typically, the kinds of science and policy questions you get help you pose as well as answer questions. You might be asking questions about, what are the sources of water? Let's see if I can get that. Can you guys see this cursor or not?
Yeah.
Oh, you can. Great. So you
I
might
can. I don't know. I understand it. Some people have problems.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. We all can almost.
That's
it's just
great.
he's handling it.
Thank you. So you might want to know, what are your sources of water? You might want to know, where is the water being used, or where should it be used? Now, there's an interesting question. How much is being used? How much should be used? When is it being used? Today, tomorrow, or sometime later? So these are all, kind of interesting. And then what are we using the water for? Are we using it for cities, the environment, for crops? And what are we using it for? What are the upstream, downstream connections? Those are very important questions. And then we're going into policy type questions. Maybe how should, or how could, or how might the water be used differently than it's now being used? That's a great question, isn't it? So there's always the is questions, what is happening, and the ought questions, what should be happening. And we think of that as being the factual. This goes back to the days of the ancient Greeks who worried about things like that, as well as the counterfactual, the way things could or should be different, that we have not actually yet seen. So factual requires measurement of history, counterfactual requires some kind of forecasting typically. Okay, so what are some more typical questions? Well, we oftentimes ask questions about the sources of water and the uses. And we might have a big interest in how it's used by time, that is historical, or maybe today, or maybe sometime in the future. We might be looking at inflow patterns. Where is it coming from? We might be looking at diversion patterns, both surface water or pumped water, groundwater. We might be looking at how much is in reservoirs. My wife runs a water purification and delivery business, and I helped her with her machine the other day that both stores water and releases water. It's kind of an interesting experience I had. I hauled around more than a ton of water a couple of nights ago. Oh, it's tiring. Water is heavy, about 62 or 3 pounds per cubic foot, about 1 ton per cubic meter, so don't haul too much of it. Big question, what's the economic value of water by where it is, or what you're using it for and where it is. By climate scenario, maybe inflows might change. Maybe the historical climate, you might be looking at small change. You might be looking at large changes and what you compared to history. And by policy. Policy is such a huge, huge issue, isn't it? You might be looking at climate policy, some sort of adaptation and response. You might be asking questions about building new infrastructure, new dams, new treatment plants, new purification facilities, whatever, new canals, whatever you might be building. So those are some of the background problem issues. As far as our roadmap for today, I've got about maybe 6, what do we got, about 4 plus about 9 things I want to cover. We're going to tell you our plan. We're going to talk about some water issues. We're going to talk about various river basins, hydroeconomic models, what they are, why we do them, what role economics plays in this, what kind of results we might expect to see from hydroeconomic models, who these stakeholders are, what the outcomes are of the models, what we've not yet solved, the open challenges, if you will, and the lessons learned. So I'll start here with the plan. And the aim of this plan is for me to give you folks an approach for using these hydroeconomic models to somehow connect scientific understanding, this is the factual stuff, with policy choices. And these are policies we have not yet seen typically, where the unit is some kind of a river basin, that is lots and lots of sources and uses of water. So why do we like these hydroeconomic models? Well, I suppose a lot of reasons. They're a lot of fun to build. We can write GAMS code. They're great fun. But the idea is it gives you better understanding of the connected human and hydrologic processes in a water system. And this is sort of the science aspect, the hydrology. This is the people aspect. And then you've got this system there in the background. So you might want to look at, well, I got 3 kind of parallel things here. You might want to look at historical water use. So that's the, measuring technical stuff. And the benefits, this is what the water is worth to people. Or you might want to investigate current, not historical, but current water use and economic benefits. Notice the parallelism there. Or future. Haven't seen that yet, have we? Water use and benefits. And the use and benefits are very intimately tied with each other. So this is why we do it. Well, anatomy of a water problem. Well, we all know what anatomy of people are all about, but what's the anatomy of a water problem? Well, all kinds of water problems floating around out there. But I think most generally, you can say you have a water problem or an issue maybe whenever you have water of any of these following wrong dimensions. Okay, if you got the wrong quantity, if you got the wrong quality, if you've got the wrong timing. That is, you got it today, but you really need it in August, so you got a water problem. You have a dynamic water problem. Maybe the location. You've got water, but it isn't where you need it. My wife's customers order water delivered to their front porch, so she goes and buys some at Walmart and delivers it to their house. And man, the water at Walmart doesn't help those customers much, but water at their front door helps them quite a bit. So if you get it at the wrong location, you got a problem, don't you? Wrong price, if it costs too much, or I suppose too little in some cases, or maybe the water costs. So if any of these things is wrong, you've got a problem. And the right, solving the problem typically means adjusting one or more of these 6 dimensions, and hydroeconomic models let you do that. So they're very cool. River basins, well, there's a lot of river basins in the world. Depends on how you define a basin. Depends on the scale and purpose of classification. But there are a lot of major international river basins. One source I looked up the other day said between 263 and 310. But there are many sub-basins, and depends on how you classify them, I suppose. And then the different countries count them in different ways. And so these vary quite significantly. Indonesia, for example, has over 42,000 basins that they've identified, and water is very important to Indonesia, just like it is to everybody else. And I got this little major rivers of the world, or major river basins, if you will. And you can see all these river basins. And if you like these hydroeconomic models, you say to yourself, gee, maybe I ought to take a look at this particular river basin here and, build a model and publish a paper and meet some people and maybe get some grant money to keep a graduate student going, whether it's in Riverside or Las Cruces or Harvard, Cambridge, Massachusetts, or University of Cape Town, or wherever it might be. So these are all, each one of these river basins is I think of them as researchable units. We publish papers on probably 10 basins of the world, not all, but many around the world. So the basin is sort of the unit with these hydroeconomic models. Some of the important basins, well, the Tigris and Euphrates, geez, that's still a very, very important part of the world. The Turks, the Syrians, the Iraqis, discuss and quarrel sometimes over water in that system. The Indus Basin supports all kinds of people in Pakistan and India. And as about 2 weeks ago, as you all know, the Indus Water Treaty of 1960 between these two countries has been suspended by India following escalations, as you all know. So if you're building hydroeconomic models to look at, political uses of science, such as this Indus thing, can be a very useful and compelling endeavor. The Nile River has ongoing tensions, especially over building of the Grand Ethiopian Dam several years ago, starting in 2011. Mostly finished now, but they're still doing work on it. Murray-Darling in Australia, continued conflict in that country. I visited there, when was that? Early 2010. They kept talking to me about bisons, and I didn't know what they meant by a bison. I thought they were looking about buffalo, but in fact, bison stood for basin. So, and then my wife and I were at an art museum. I asked if we could have coffee. They said, sure, but be sure you drink it on the slight floor. And I thought, now how am I going to recognize a slight floor? Well, they meant a slate floor. And so as long as you get your Australian accent cleaned up, it's a great place to visit. People are very friendly there. But boy, that Murray-Darling Basin is something worth fighting over, or at least, debating. The Yangtze is a very complicated system partly because it's a very densely populated region of the world, as you all know. The Colorado Basin, we have a Colorado River Compact drafted in 1922. And those waters are shared by 7 U.S. states. And I'm proud to say that here in New Mexico, we are in the upper basin and the lower basin. So aren't we lucky for that? And I have a student getting ready to send a paper in on the basin. GAMS optimization, fun stuff. The Cape Town, South Africa. Well, I didn't know that much about the river basins out there, but I did some research over the last few days. Looks like that city lies mostly in the Berg River Basin. I'm probably mispronouncing it. And, you know, Cape Town's got a lot of critical policy debates, ongoing challenges, justice, infrastructure. And then you guys had that, what was that called? The Day Zero about back in 2016 that was very famous internationally. So you folks in Cape Town are in a very important water, you know, science and policy debate region of the world, as you know. Great Lakes in the US, Amazon, Rhine, all these basins face big policy debates, and hydroeconomic models help. Here's a nice little picture of the Himalayas, or Himalayas as some say, where they have lots and lots of water running off that those snow-capped mountains like Mount Everest and some of them. But interestingly enough, the Himalayas have very little accessible water. There in Nepal, one of our former graduate students, G.C. Epar, graduated from Washington State about 2015 or so. He's making lots of money now, not sure what he's doing, but it's good stuff. This is his picture showing the massive quantities of water that are carried on people's backs and their heads to go from the river to their home. And, you know, I'm telling you folks, water weighs 62.5 pounds or so per cubic foot. And if you're carrying much more than a cubic foot on your head, that is very, very heavy stuff. And these people could benefit from a nice pipeline into their house so their young girls would not have to haul so much water, advance their education. So lack of access to water is not part of the dynamic optimization, I don't suppose, is it? So why do we do hydroeconomic models? What are they and how do we do them? Well, I guess it depends on who you talk to, but certainly they help us. These models help us understand how these interlocking pieces fit together, how we can connect the science and stakeholder policy nexus, comprehensive assessment. We like to be able to assess things of things like climate scenarios or drought scenarios or rainfall, you know, cloud bursts, floods, that sort of thing. Policy responses. So, you know, climate scenarios, this is what nature does in the short run, it's nature. And then policy, this is what people can do to handle it. It lets you test for methods to sustain policy responses to climate water stress, whether it's droughts or floods or whatever it might be. So, I mean, it lets you do lots of really cool things. More on the why. Well, there's a lot of these basin models around the world. There's a SWOT model that's floating around. It's a rainfall runoff, multiple sub-basins. U.S. Geological Survey originally put that together, but a lot of people are using it and improving it. ModFlow is a very famous U.S. Geological Survey, mostly groundwater flow model. Boy, there's some really interesting mathematics behind that. And we try to get a paper published that mixed ModFlow and economics, and we sort of got it done back in 2016, but we have much to go. But it's very rare, believe it or not, to see economic elements in these basin, or as my Australian friends would say, bison scale models. You see a lot of technology, but not many dollars, not many pounds, dollars, and cents. However, the stakeholders we work with almost always want economic outcomes. And for those of us who are hydrologists or, you know, not economists, we talk to these stakeholders and we might say to them, hey, you guys, why are you so worried about grubby, mercenary, dollar-denominated outcomes? Think of nobility. Don't think of grubby old dollars. And of course, they don't listen to that because they are thinking of mercenary money-denominated outcomes. It's very important to probably all of us, I guess. And then when you talk to international development professionals, at least when I talk to them, they always ask me, why don't you guys teach more economics in your natural resource economic programs, your universities? And I say, we do teach it. We teach lots of it, but we just can't keep our students awake. They find economics really boring. And they say, now you make those students appreciate it better. So, you know, I've been working for many years at that. And if I can get them to drink lots of coffee and I can tell good jokes in the middle of my econ lectures, they tend to find it semi-interesting. But econ classes are, you know, students a lot of times just don't find, unless they're econ majors, they don't find it very interesting. Well, so why do we do this? Well, we need facts. We need facts on the economic benefits and cost in some cases from today's water use patterns. We need information on the benefits from tomorrow's that we haven't seen yet, water use patterns. We want to know the changes in economic benefits from policies that we might enact or maybe have enacted. We could do forward-looking, what we call ex ante. We could do backward-looking, ex post. You know, what will the policy be? What was the policy? How should it have been? How might it have been? Lots of very interesting policy questions. Climate, of course, we care about. We care a lot about technologies. And all these things are affecting today's water use patterns, but they're also affecting tomorrow's water use patterns. That ought to be a subhead, I guess, shouldn't it? And so, you know, why do we do it? We need to replicate, or if you will, simulate in some cases, historical conditions. We might want to take a systems approach. We need to optimize something typically. We might want to make adjustments from history. We might want to make these applications to future policy. And we need this capacity for policy analysis. It's very important. Past policies that we did or could have done, future policies that we might do or should do, future policies, things we could do differently than we're doing now. So we need external inputs, especially water inputs, but others too, like drought and climate, actual as well as potential. Well, so what are they? Well, they're typically a method, as I said back up here. Here's what we need, here's what we get. It's a method to replicate historical conditions. So really, what it is, it's the need to do it. It's the method. It uses systems approaches. So it's the same back here as the why, but now we're doing the what. So I'll go through this just a little faster. So how do we do it? Usually we use something called mathematical programming. Wouldn't have to, but that's the classical way to do it. We have an objective function. We typically have equations. They got to have hydrologic balance. You can't just make up flows. Typically you have climate stress, maybe institutional water sharing requirements, policy choices, looking forward or looking backwards. Why we do it? Well, we like the mathematics because it can be documented. I think Paul Samuelson once said, if you can't do it mathematically, you're not doing anything useful, at least in economics. That was his opinion. It lets you replicate what you've done. But one of the limitations of math programming is you oftentimes require constraints to match historical water use patterns, and those are sometimes hard to model mathematically. So here is a typical hydroeconomic optimization model. You're maximizing total net benefits for each case climate scenario, for each P policy. So you're looking at each of these Ks and each of these Ps, and you're typically summing over I, and the I's are going to be, let's see, where are my I's there? Economic sector. You're summing over basin location, and you're summing over year, total benefits minus total cost, while you respect constraints on inflows, temperature, water use by crops, people, population, water, and treaties. Well, you know, what if we change today's treaty? How would that affect things? So if you can build this kind of a model, and there are many of them out there. In fact, I sent you one that you can play with. You can download it. It's available. If you can't get it, send me an email at fward@nmsu.edu, and I'll send you a little optimization hydroeconomic model you can play with. They're a lot of fun to play with. Okay, so what are the kinds of results we typically get? Well, we might get something like How are we going to share shortages? Free market or proportional sharing? Which year? Year 1, 2, or 3? Drought scenario versus dry. So under proportional sharing, you'll see the benefits are almost always lower for all 3 of those years. So under proportional sharing, you have much, much lower benefits than under free market trading. And oh my gosh, that carries lots of implications. And I believe these results came from the hydroeconomic GAMS code that I sent your organizers recently. So you ought to be able to replicate that and get these same numbers. Well, how about these stakeholders we work with? How about these folks? Well, they usually have weak access to the mathematics, weak motivation. They don't have much input data, not much development, not much structure. They can't change the data. We worked with a group down at UT El Paso that published this thing on CyberShare, and I bet I can click on that and get it. So this is take a first splash at our friends at UT El Paso. You can grab this thing and do some experiments yourself and have a lot of fun with it. Just click on that web, and with luck, I can get back to where we were. Oh, and with bad luck, I don't get back to where we were. Let's try. There we go. And you don't need any kind of password. It's a fairly usable thing. Here is another example of a paper we published about 8 years ago. We want discounted net present value for some basins in Afghanistan. I guess this was all the basins in Afghanistan. Without a treaty versus with a treaty, and we have upstream priority. None, these are the scales of reservoir development. None small, medium, large, none small, medium, large. Well, when you have large reservoir development, those cost lots and lots of money. So as your treaties get with treaty, as your reservoirs get larger, you got to pay more for them. So we found that the medium scale reservoir size was a great benefit, had the highest net benefits. And if you make them too much bigger, they cost more at the margin than they're worth. Okay, what are some open challenges in hydroeconomic models? Well, linking them to stakeholders and policy decisions is a very hard thing to do. It hadn't been done very well. How do you substitute? What can you substitute for water when you have growing demands? Well, you can have more infrastructure, change institutions, technology and imports, water sharing agreements where everyone benefits, benefit sharing, sort of the Pareto improvement idea. What kind of objectives should you have? And how can you invest in resilience? Why would you do it? How would you do it? And how much would you do it? And I've only got 2 more slides here, so I think we're pretty much on time. Let's see if I can get that just a little bit bigger. And more open challenges. You know, I'm not sure that this Teams thing is working just perfectly. Why am I having trouble going to these last couple of slides? Let's back up a little bit. You know, I'm not sure this Teams is working perfectly. Let's take a look at some of the lessons we've learned. Here we go. People are similar everywhere you go, we've learned. It does pay to be diplomatic. It pays to be a good listener. Listen to what people say, listen to what they mean. The data, you got to have data, otherwise you're just kind of shooting in the air. It's best to under-promise and over-deliver on your promises, otherwise your project sponsors will be unhappy. And then get these stakeholders engaged in a way that is the final frontier in application of hydroeconomic models. So getting to that frontier opens up lots of opportunities for stakeholder contribution, and so that can be a really good thing. And I might have one more. Can I get to this? There we go. In our paper that Ariel helped me write, 80-some pages, I've got about 300 articles, mostly in peer-reviewed journals, that are in that paper. So check them out. You might find it interesting. And other than that, comments. I think we've taken up our half hour here, GB. Tell me if we have For some reason, there we go. Comments welcome. Anybody have any questions that they would like to pose to me? And I'll do my best to try to answer them.
Yeah. So thank you. First of all, thank you very much for a very enriching presentation. Those of you who have not been exposed or familiar with hydroeconomic models certainly can be improving their understanding by reading that review paper that includes so many things that are beyond just describing what others did.